What if there were some quite subtle, quite basic things you could do with the chords you know on the piano to make them sound more musical and more professional? Let's say that you're in the fairly early days of playing around with chords on the piano, and maybe you've learned some basic ones like C, A minor, perhaps a couple of sevenths like G7 or F7. And you might also have picked up the fact that you can play those chords in different shapes. You can take that basic C, E and G that makes up a C chord and play it like that, and it's still a C chord because all of the notes are C's, E's and G's. That's great as far as theory goes, but when you start playing a song, especially if you're in, like I said, in the quite early days, it's really tempting just to sit down and play the chord and think, right, okay, I've got my C chord and maybe my next chord is A minor. Okay, I've got that, my next chord is F. Yeah, got that, and my next one is G. Brilliant, okay, got that. And what you wind up doing is something like this. Yeah, you play quite a basic rhythm and you get quite a basic sound, but it doesn't have that kind of professional polish. What you could do with that chord progression is something like this, which is going to sound much more complicated. But all I'm doing there is using exactly the same notes. Every C chord there was just a C, an E and a G. Every A minor was just an A, C, E. Every F was, you get the idea, okay? So exactly the same notes were being used as the boring clomping version, but I was varying my voicings, my inversions, my articulations and my dynamics. Now, those are all concepts that I've talked about here on YouTube before, but what I thought it would be a cool idea to do was to kind of put them all together a little bit in one tutorial. So if you're in that position, you're trying to figure out the chords, but you want that slightly more professional sound, let's just think about some quick things you can do to get closer to it, okay? First thing I should say is that the pedal is your friend here, okay? I'm using the pedal a lot to stick those chords together, and using it here is easy. I'm just, because I'm only playing chord notes, there are no potential discords or anything like that, playing it once on each chord. And when the chord changes, I just lift it and lift it again, put it down again, just to give me that sustain all the way through. So just practicing that to start with can really help. So those things I mentioned, voicing, inversion, articulation, dynamics. Let's go through them one at a time. Voicing just refers to the shape you play a chord in, okay? So that, a simple triad, is a voicing of C major. But I could voice C major like this, or like this. Okay, those are still C major chords because they've only got C's, E's and G's in them. Now, when we're voicing a chord, there's a simple rule we can follow. Space it wide at the bottom and tight at the top, okay? So the right hand here, what we might call the upper structure of my chord, I've got those four notes all close together, E, G, C, E, all notes of the C major chord. I don't need all four of them. I could just play three if I wanted to, but for a little bit of extra thickness, I'm playing all four. They're all quite tightly spaced together. My bass notes, my two C's down here, are quite widely spaced. Let's see what happens if we do that the other way around and space tight at the bottom and wide at the top. Okay, now sometimes we might kind of want that sound, but it's a bit kind of chunky, it's a bit unbalanced. The reason for that is to do with the mathematics of overtones. Down here in the bass, we've got lots of audible overtones running up the piano, all of them within the audible range, okay? Whereas with notes up here, there are fewer audible overtones. They go so high, your dog can hear them, but you can't, okay? To crack the old joke I crack every time when I talk about overtones. So to kind of work with the overtone series rather than against it, we space our chords wide at the bottom and tight at the top, and that usually gives us a balanced sound. We could spread even further apart. Okay, I'm probably going out of shot there, but I'm playing a low C, lowest C on the piano keyboard there, right at the bottom, doubling it and playing that shape up there, okay? That might be a nice chord to play right at the end, of a piece or something like that, especially if it's been quite dramatic, but you probably wouldn't want it in the middle. There's a bit of a hole there that kind of wants filling, a frequency hole, yeah? But when you're playing a song, you can choose your voicings to suit the mood of your song. So if you're playing something quite delicate, you can play quite high voicings. If it's kind of darker, you can go further down the piano keyboard, just being a bit more careful about spacing these chords. Notice I've just switched to using 3-note chords there, so we're not getting too many of those thick overtones. Okay, I'm right down in kind of risky territory there for getting slightly too chunky. Use your ear to judge whether a chord is starting to sound too chunky or not, and if it's getting muddy, just thin it out a little bit in this range of the piano. Okay, so there are lots of different ways you can use voicings immediately to suit the mood of what you're doing, and that's a key musical concept. It's something that professionals do. If they're working on a song, they choose their chord voicings to suit the mood of the song. Something else professionals do, again, I've talked about this in the past, but it's worth mentioning here, is make sure that their voicings are interlocking with each other quite nicely. So if you've got that C, A minor, F, G, you could play it like this. But that's kind of really jumpy. Okay, can you see how that doesn't sound like it's kind of flowing musically? What professionals do is pick voicings that use shared notes and proximal notes so they flow into each other. Okay, did you see how I went from C to A minor? But then when I wanted the F chord, I made use of the fact that the A minor and F share the A and C, and just did that, and then went to a G chord, okay? And doing that, you can get really kind of quite complex sounds. Yeah, and I'm going to stress this several times in this video, but it's really important to stress that when I played what I was playing just there, I was playing no different notes from the simple C, A minor, F, G. Okay, all the notes were exactly the same, so I wasn't applying any extra theory. There were no extensions, there were no fancy substitutions. I didn't need to learn loads of extra things to get there. I was just using the same notes but playing them physically in a different way on the piano keyboard. Okay, so that's my voicings. If you're working on a song, even now, pause the video, pick up the chord progression and just try playing around with those voicings. It might need a little bit of thought at first, but that's good for you, yeah? That will really help you improve your skills. What else can we do? The next thing was inversion. So you might be aware that the quality, the character of a chord can be affected by its lowest note, what we call its inversion. If we look at that in its simplest terms, there is a very simple C major chord, what we would call a triad, a 3-note chord, all of the notes really close to each other in its root position. Okay, if we move it up what we would call an inversion, it goes into its first inversion. Now E is the lowest note. We do that again, we get to second inversion. Now G is the lowest note. Once again, it's only C's, E's and G's, all of those chords, but we've got root position, first inversion, second inversion. Yeah. And we can do that using bass notes as well. So there is a root position C major, first inversion C major because the E is in the bass, second inversion C major because the G is in the bass. Now if we change the inversions of our chords, like I said, it changes their character. So we're in the key of C major, there's a very settled C chord. What happens if we put G in the bass? Suddenly things are a little bit more on edge. There's a bit more of a feeling of epicness, of grandeur. It's somehow different. You wouldn't want to do that loads in a song, but it's a nice effect when it comes. And if we go back to our little C, A minor, F, G chord progression, we can use inversions in a cunning way there to change the character of the progression, like this. Okay, I played it in a really basic way there, but did you see what I did in the bass? I played C, then A minor, root position, but then I went to the F chord, but kept the A in the bass, so I wound up with an F chord in its first inversion, okay, and then to G. Something else I could do, which is often really effective, is to use a pedal tone to keep the same bass note running through a good chunk of the chord progression. Okay, I'm only switching when I come to a chord which doesn't have a C in it, because if you think about C, A minor and F, they all have C's in. Once again, I'm not using any notes that are different from the basic notes of C, A minor, F and G. So far all I've done is play around with the voicing and the inversion, but I also mentioned articulation and dynamics. I'll come on to those in a second. Just before I do, let me mention my Patreon community. We often talk about this kind of thing on my Patreon, and we've got a really great gang of people over there. Most are in the range from very early stage beginners on the piano up to kind of late beginner and intermediate. Yeah, we're not about kind of music rocket science. There's a range of stuff for people in the first few years of playing. Okay, check it out. You can sign up for free to start with to get a little bit of a taster. You'll get regular emails, both containing free articles and previews of the exclusive videos and podcasts and other bits and pieces and PDFs and things that I often share with paying members. And if you do decide to become a paying member, you get all of that stuff. You get complimentary access to my piano packs, which are super popular, to my exercises, inventions and ideas series of piano exercises. Plus you get to join our members only Discord chat, which is great fun. We have a real laugh on there. So if that sounds kind of cool, if this kind of stuff is interesting to you, do check out patreon.com/Bill Hilton. I think you will really like it. Anyway, on with the show. Let's think about articulation and dynamics. If I'm playing around with my chord progression here, yes, I can mess about with my different notes, but there's other cool stuff I can do as well. For example, if I did this. Okay, I articulated those chords in kind of varied ways. So I gave the lowest note of the chord, the bass note, a kind of stress, what we would call in music an accent. Okay, and then the higher notes were a little bit quieter. So there was both different articulation and dynamics going on there. Let me just break that down. The articulation is the buff, the attack. Okay, and then gentler up here. Okay, I'm articulating it differently. The dynamic works in tandem with that. Actually, we've got loud and we've got slightly softer. Okay, so even in one chord you can vary the articulation and the dynamic to create an interesting effect. Something else I was doing a little bit there, this is very much an articulation thing, was arpeggiating some of those chords, especially in the upper structure. You see how I spread that chord there, just that bit of the chord. That's what we call an arpeggiation. You can do it quite quickly like that, or you can do it quite slowly. That's a very idiomatic piano technique. It's really easy to do, and straight away it gives you a more interesting, more musical sound. Don't overdo it, but if you can work it into what you're doing, it can create kind of a richer sound. And if you think about that kind of thing across the level of a whole progression, yeah, you can create really, really interesting effects. Once again, I wasn't playing any different notes from the basic C chord, A minor chord, F chord, G chord. It was all C's, E's and G's on the C, A, C and E's on the A minor. But I was doing those different things, those little bits of different voicing, different articulation, different dynamics. And like I said at the start, very subtle, very basic things that was making it sound much more kind of rich. Yeah, this is a really important thing. So much of what you can do on the piano is so simple. People want to learn so much. They want to learn about sort of drop voicings and rootless voicings and 13th and sharp 11th and all of that stuff. And yes, that's great. Yeah, but you don't need to know all that stuff yet. You can create really cool music by taking the really, really basic chords and just playing around with voicing, inversion, articulation and dynamics. And don't forget the pedal. Okay, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, please do give me a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and like I said, check out my Patreon. And if you're after another video at the same kind of level to watch, why not take a look at this one, which is popping up on the screen now. I always seem to point at the wrong side, so hopefully it's there. Okay, see you over there, or see you on Patreon.